My name is Siripan. I'm 74 years old, and I want to begin tonight with something that took me most of my life to understand about compassion. Something that when I finally understood it, changed not just how I related to others, but how I related to everything, including myself, including my own suffering, including the parts of my life that I had spent decades trying to change through willpower and discipline and the determined application of whatever I believed at the time would finally make me the person I wanted to be. I believed for most of my life that compassion was something you extended outward, something you offered to people who were suffering, a response to the pain of others, something generous and warm and admirable that good people had more of than other people. I did not understand that compassion, real compassion, the kind that the Buddhist tradition has cultivated and refined over thousands of years, is not primarily a response to suffering outside yourself. It is a way of relating to reality, all of reality, including the reality of your own inner world. And when you bring genuine compassion to your inner world, when you learn to meet your own experience with the same open, non-judgmental warmth that you would bring to a person you loved who was in pain, something happens that no other practice can produce. Not meditation alone, not discipline alone, not understanding alone. A fundamental transformation in the quality of your experience of being yourself. Let me tell you what my inner world looked like before I understood this, because the contrast is important. For most of my adult life, I had a relationship with my own inner experience that was, if I am honest, primarily adversarial. There were thoughts and feelings that I approved of, that I considered acceptable, that I allowed to exist without comment. And then there were the others, the anxious thoughts, the petty jealousies, the moments of self-doubt, the judgments about others that I was ashamed of having, the grief that I believed I should have been finished with by now, the fear that seemed irrational, the anger that seemed disproportionate. These inner experiences I fought with, suppressed, judged, tried to reason out of existence. And when they persisted anyway, which they always did, I judged myself for having them, for not being further along, for still struggling with things that I believed someone of my age and practice and experience should have transcended. And this fighting, this constant internal war against the parts of my inner world that I had decided were unacceptable, was exhausting. And it produced nothing except more of the suffering it was trying to eliminate. The first thing the Buddhist teaching of compassion showed me is something that sounds obvious when you say it directly, but that most people have never actually applied to themselves. The fighting makes it worse. Not just slightly worse, categorically worse. Because every time you fight against an inner experience, every time you judge it, suppress it, argue with it, tell yourself you shouldn't be having it, you add a second layer of suffering to the first. The original experience is there, the pain, the anxiety, the difficult emotion, whatever it is. And then the resistance to the original experience is also there. And the resistance is often more painful than what it is resisting. The Buddhist tradition calls this the second arrow. The first arrow is the original suffering. The second arrow is what you do to yourself because of the suffering, the judgment, the shame, the should not be. And compassion as a transformative practice for the inner world begins with the decision to put down the second arrow. Not to eliminate the first one, to stop wounding yourself further with resistance to what is already there. The practice of putting down the second arrow is simpler than it sounds. When you notice a difficult inner experience arising, whether it is an emotion, a thought pattern, a reaction you are not proud of, the practice is to pause before the automatic movement toward judgment or suppression begins, and to bring to that experience the same quality of attention you would bring to a friend who was suffering. Not fixing attention, not advising attention, not this should not be happening attention. The attention that says, I see that this is hard. I see that this is here. You don't have to hide it. You don't have to be different than you are right now. This quality of attention, this compassionate witnessing of your own inner experience changes the experience itself. Not by making it go away, by removing the layer of resistance that was compounding it. And without the resistance, the original experience becomes more manageable, more finite, more like something that is moving through you rather than something that is permanently you. If what I'm describing is touching something in you, if you recognize the inner war I'm speaking of, stay with me. Because what I want to share next is the deeper practice, the one that transforms not just individual experiences, but the entire quality of your relationship with your inner world. And if this space is offering you something real, come back when you need it. Because compassion as a practice is not something you apply once and then possess. It is something you return to again and again, each time the war with yourself starts again. The second thing the Buddha's teaching on compassion shows us is this. Compassion is not the absence of discernment. This is the misunderstanding that keeps many people from applying compassion to themselves. They believe that if they meet their inner experience with compassion, they are condoning it. That if they do not judge their anxious thoughts, they will be overwhelmed by them. That if they meet their own failures with warmth instead of harsh self-criticism, they will stop trying to do better. But this is exactly backwards. Compassion does not remove discernment. It creates the conditions in which discernment can actually function. Because when you are fighting against your inner experience, when you are in a state of resistance and judgment, your capacity to see clearly is compromised. Fear clouds perception. Shame distorts understanding. The self-criticism that you believe is making you better is often what is keeping you stuck, because it generates the anxiety that produces the very patterns it is criticizing. Compassion does not say everything is acceptable. It says everything can be seen clearly. And from clear seeing, from a genuine, non-distorted understanding of what is actually happening in your inner world and why, the most effective and most sustainable change becomes possible. Not the forced, will-powered, shame-driven change that collapses under pressure. The change that arises from genuine understanding. From meeting the pattern with enough clarity to see where it comes from, what it is protecting, what it actually needs, and what would genuinely address that need, rather than simply suppressing the symptom. The third dimension of compassion as a transformative inner practice is what the Buddhist tradition calls common humanity. The recognition that what you are experiencing in your inner world, however particular it feels, however specific to your history and your wounds and your particular configuration of fears and hopes, is part of the universal human experience. Every person who has ever lived has known self-doubt, has known the experience of failing to live up to their own standards, has known the particular pain of seeing yourself behave in ways you are not proud of and not knowing how to stop, has known the loneliness of the inner life that cannot be fully shared. These experiences do not make you defective, they make you human. And the recognition of this, genuinely felt rather than intellectually understood, changes the quality of how you meet your own inner world. Because when you know that what you are experiencing is not a sign of your unique brokenness, but a part of the shared experience of being alive, the shame that compounds suffering loses some of its power. The isolation that suffering creates is partially dissolved, and the compassion you might more easily feel toward others becomes more naturally available toward yourself. I practiced this explicitly for years before I really felt it. The explicit practice is simple. When you are in the middle of a difficult inner experience, when you are suffering in the way that humans suffer, when you are ashamed or afraid or grieving or angry or any of the other forms that pain takes, you consciously remind yourself, others have felt this too. Right now, in this moment, there are other people in the world who are feeling something very similar to what I am feeling. I am not alone in this. Not as a way of minimizing your experience, as a way of connecting it to the larger human story of which it is a part. And something in that connection, that simple recognition of shared humanity, creates a warmth that isolation cannot, a quality of being held by something larger than the individual suffering. The fourth dimension is the most counterintuitive, and it is this: compassion for yourself is not separate from compassion for others. It is the same movement, made in the same direction, from the same source. The Buddhist tradition is specific about this. You cannot genuinely extend compassion outward that you have not genuinely cultivated inward. Not because you must fix yourself before you can help others, but because the compassion that you offer others flows through you, and what flows through you is shaped by how you treat what is inside you. If your inner world is primarily a place of judgment and war, then the compassion you offer outward will be limited by that. It will be available for certain kinds of suffering and not others, for certain people and not others, for the suffering that you find acceptable and not for the suffering that reminds you of what you have judged and suppressed in yourself. But when your inner world becomes a place of genuine, compassionate witnessing, when you have learned to meet your own experience with the quality of open, non-rejecting attention that allows it to be what it is without adding the second arrow, your capacity to meet the experience of others expands in proportion. Because you are no longer limited by what you cannot tolerate in yourself, you can sit with others in forms of suffering that would previously have been too close, too reminiscent, too threatening to genuinely be present for. And this expansion of compassionate capacity, this growing ability to be truly present with the full range of human experience because you have become more able to be present with the full range of your own, is one of the most significant transformations that inner compassion can produce. My name is Siripan. I'm 74 years old. I live in a small temple where compassion is not a virtue that is admired from a distance, but a practice that is lived daily. Where the inner world is not a place to be managed and optimized and kept presentable, but a place to be genuinely met with honesty, with warmth, with the understanding that whatever is there, however difficult, however embarrassing, however contrary to the person you wish you were, deserves the same quality of open, compassionate attention that any suffering deserves. Not because you are letting yourself off the hook, because the hook itself, that instrument of self-judgment and self-punishment, is not actually producing the changes you want. It is producing more suffering. And more suffering is not the path to transformation. Compassion is, not as a concept, as the actual quality of attention you bring moment by moment to whatever arises in the inner world that is yours to inhabit. Before we part tonight, I want to ask you one thing, not what you feel most compassion for in others. What aspect of your own inner world have you been fighting the longest? The experience you judge most harshly in yourself. The inner pattern you have been trying to eliminate through resistance for years. Name it, not to indulge it, to see it clearly for the first time without the second arrow of judgment added to it. Because that naming, that first act of compassionate seeing, is often the beginning of the only kind of change that actually lasts.